Um,
Exam course, uh, especially if you're teaching any kind of like exam course or anything like that in your respective states, we're so focused on, here's the information, here's what you need to know, here's, this assessment, whatever, that it leaves, oftentimes not enough room, not enough time for reflection. And so that's what I'm working on now, and is finding the ways to have students, you know, personally interact with this, personally reflect on this information. And so one of the things that I'm writing now is having them write about times in their lives when they are affected by whatever it is that we are currently talking about. And so we're focused obviously on migration, but my mind is kind of like just broadly any discussion that we're having, what can be a conversation that reflects in their personal lives. And so I'm kind of just creating like a little miniature list for myself. I think that's going to be um, one of the critical aspects of kind of what I'm getting from this right now.
that's fantastic. One, I'm thrilled that it's generative for you, um, on a pedagogical sense. That's wonderful. And so hopefully you're going to experience this sort of journey yourself firsthand, and then you'll be able to translate it into pedagogy. So that's great to hear. Really love to hear that, Kevin. All right. So how about let's hear from group number 3, and I'll tell you the group members. That was Beth, Josie, Leanne, Sensoriti, and Mark Henley.
So I'll share. My feed was cutting in and out, and I apologize to my group members because I didn't get a chance to hear all of your invitations, and I do hope that we get a chance to kind of speak again so we can talk on this. Um, on mine, uh, which was to kind of speak of the connected experiences that align to migrational movement. So oftentimes in my classrooms, I will bring up historical, specifically with dealing with the Great Migration, I will touch on different migrational movements that kind of align to just intersectional connection that makes it relatable to many different people. So I started with the question on what might that first step feel like to go on that migration, being on that platform, that first invitation. And I touched on the Great Migration, much like other historical mass movements, such as the Israelites going into Egypt and going out of Egypt, or Native Americans being displaced across the Southeast and into the Southwest and into the Greater West. Um, that type of movement, I could only imagine one feeling fear and anxiety because they're going into a land or a place that they don't know anything about. And majority of the time, people are leaving seeking asylum, and so they're taking what they can carry. And Richard Wright touched on that in that poem that was illustrated on that first, I forget what page it was, but it was a part of the reading where Richard Wright says, to fling oneself into the unknown, I was taking part of the South to transplant an alien soil, right? And so it touches on that you're taking a piece of yourself, you're taking a part of where you come from, and you're going into another region, and you're holding on to a little bit of that, and you're bringing it to this region that you don't know about. Will it welcome you? You don't know, but again, it's that clinging to this hope that you'll find something different when you get there. I continue to write on what that experience might be like for Black people and Black bodies in general. So moving from one region to another after arriving as a foreigner in a place is something that might have been challenging for a time period where brothers and sisters in the 1940s and 1930s, it was dangerous for them to travel. I did a little bit of research using some of the resources that we had to just find a article that could align to what that might be like. And what I ended up finding was a June 1921 article that describes the Tulsa riots, which it's 11 hours away. It's in Birmingham, but they're speaking about it in the newspaper, and it speaks about just a tragedy that happened. So I could only imagine individuals hearing news about this horrific incident over here, word of mouth or newspaper, and knowing that, hey, I still need to, in this dangerous time, still travel across this region to the next. And it touches on that briefly with little George as he is having to escape the horrors of Jim Crow Florida. And he could care less about where he's heading. I think he's heading north, but he speaks about how he would much rather deal with what's unknown up there than deal with the horrors of what could happen to him if he's caught. So it's this idea of feeling fear and anxiety, but also having hope because you know you're going to somewhere that is better than where you are right now. And also this understanding that you're probably going to leave a lot of things behind you. But there's also another hope, I think, in all of these individuals because they know that they're going to be greeted by a friendly face or that they'll have the ability to reconcile or just meet again with their family members at a later date. But that's what I wrote about in my invitation. And again, apologize to my group members because I didn't get a chance to share that and I didn't get a chance to hear from all of you, but I can't wait to.
So what I love here is the connection between the subjective, emotional, visceral, and the quote unquote objective, factual, historical. And you're really, if we want learning and meaning making to be impactful, students are going to have to connect that historical factual to their subjective emotional. And that's what you all are doing right here. Fantastic. I love it. Group breakout room number 1 was Anisha, Eric, Rebecca, and Ivana.
I didn't get to share, but I think one thing, hearing other people's invitations to create, was that the invitations to create are very make you feel a little bit exposed and vulnerable, which is, you know, good if you're on the verge of a breakthrough, intellectually, philosophically, you know, moving on to a higher plane or whatever. So, yeah, that's what I kind of got from our conversation, that it made us vulnerable, which is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then your comment, Anisha, makes me think that we want them to be vulnerable, but then it's our responsibility to create the safe context for them to be vulnerable. Right. So, and that has a lot of considerations to it. So hopefully this little sharing was useful to you. And hopefully it'll spark you in future responses. As I said, that you'll be receiving 14 of these invitations, 3 each week. I think I took the week of 4th of July off. So you'll be getting more. I think perhaps for time's sake, I'm going to hold off on sharing examples of my student work. Because I've implemented this in my classroom before, my high school English classroom. And so I'll share those perhaps next week when Adele and I go more in depth into invitations, but I don't want to cut short our work today speaking about the educational contexts of the Great Migration. So I'm going to bump this part to, oh, you can see here. All right, here we are. Y'all can see this slide. Is this working, Veronica?
Yes, it's working.
There you go.
All right, well, it seems as though the focus of our discussion has really led directly into what this portion of the session is about. And we're really looking at or examining education that that either contributed to the Great Migration, those push and pull factors that were discussed earlier, and or looking at those factors that kept people in the South. So we'll start off with talking about some of the post-Civil War education. And go ahead, Dr. Blum. So that's me and my son, Chase. He's my youngest, number 2. Again, I am the interim director for the J.F. Drake Memorial Learning Resources Center and the State Black Archives here at Alabama A&M in Huntsville, Alabama. And hopefully you will enjoy what I have to say today. So I want to start off just really quickly. It doesn't have to be full 5 minutes, but I want you to at least think about, and if you have to document it while I speak, that's perfectly fine. We are recording, but just think about, what is the story of education in your family? So if there is this family story about your great-grandparents, leaving the rural whatever community and getting their formal education, or at least going beyond the 5th or 6th grade, maybe completing high school. What is the story of education in your family? Think about how your parents or grandparents, or like I said, beyond that, great-grandparents were educated. And then think about the institutional and non-institutional means of education. So we are speaking about vocational training. We're talking about any of the informal things that people would have received in a farming community, just things of that nature. And of course, focusing on some of those individual stories that would have been shared. And are there any stories of resistance to either means of education? Did your family maybe snub their nose at you wanting to go to barber school? Or did they look down at you because you decided to go to a 4-year college? What are those stories for you and for your families? So that's what we want you to examine here in this moment. Dr. Blum? So this first quote is actually from 2 attorneys and civil rights folks in Boston from 1849. The separation of the schools, so far from being for the benefit of both races, is an injury to both. It tends to create a feeling of degradation in the Blacks and of prejudice and uncharitableness in the whites. These 2 were actually integral in desegregating some of the Boston schools or Boston education system in 1849. Robert Morris was one of the first African-American attorneys at that time, and Charles Sumner was an abolitionist in Boston at that period. Dr. Blow. So segregation was essentially deemed the law in the post-war South. So we already know that the Civil War was a very serious and down and dirty period in the United States and US history. But antebellum South, so pre-war South, actually had a very rudimentary public school system. It was not like they had a formal way of doing, educating their students, unless you had a tutor, if you had money. There is, at least if anything, that set you apart. You were able to be educated. And it was just not really that many opportunities for families in the rural South or in the antebellum South to really get education, especially if you didn't have money. And from there, after the war, Southern states decided, well, if we're going to continue to do this, we're going to do this our way. And that meant that they were going to have a dual education system based on race. So white children would never be educated with children of color and vice versa. And from that, spending back even then was starkly different. So if they spent $1 per head per student on a white student, they spent about 24 cents a head per student. And that was a South Carolina article that I read that talked about that's how what the disparity was with the overall cost of education and how much effort these states were putting into educating African Americans in the South post-war. Segregated education was designed to confine children of other races to second-class citizenship and that subservient role that they expected for them to play. I know someone wrote in their Padlet, the James Baldwin excerpt and looking at one station in life. And essentially, this is what you're going to do, and this is where you're going to be because you are Black. And so this was the South's way of kind of mandating and keeping in place the sentiment of pre-war time and even just Reconstruction era, how we really felt about people of color. In 1896, the landmark case Plessy versus Ferguson was in Louisiana. Louisiana had dictated that colored people could not, or people of color could not sit in a car with white train passengers. And Plessy decided, I'm going to try it and see what happens because, there's a 14th Amendment that says essentially I have these rights and responsibilities, bestowed upon me because I'm a citizen of this country and I have I'm at least seen as a citizen. Well, they said no. They said, no, as long as we provide separate accommodations, it is equal. And that was really mainly for public spaces or accommodations. And this was the essential doctrine that made segregation the law of the land for anything race related. And that included education, though it does not distinctly say so. Continuing on, some schools in the South post-war were actually funded directly by the community. They sought that opportunity to pour in what was missing. And from their funds, they decided, okay, we can hire a teacher. We know someone who can read and they can teach our youth and teach our adults, hey, this is how you read or how you write or how you sign your name. Because as we all know, most documents at that time, a lot of folks just signed with an X. So it gave people a little bit of sense of independence, a little bit of sense of prosperity, like I can actually attain something greater than just this shanty or this one mule cart. I can do more instead of just that. From that, some of the organizations from the North, such as the Freedmen's Bureau, Northern Churches, and Northern Aid Societies, also provided funding into creating schools. There is one caveat, however. The funding was limited. So the Freedmen's Bureau only was integral in helping establish certain centers of learning in the South. I believe Howard University, Morehouse, Spelman, some of those big name schools, those received Freedmen funds and support. Northern churches such as the Methodists or the Baptist churches, some of them up north, provided support. And the Northern Aid Society. So we've all heard of the Quakers and we've heard of the Society of Friends. Some of those organizations were also integral in helping education kind of take root in the South. And of course, again, the why. Education was considered an important step towards achieving equality, prosperity, and independence. On to Black formal education. Woohoo! The South believed an educated Negro to be a dangerous Negro, and the South was not wholly wrong. For education among all kinds of men always had and always will have an element of danger and revolution, of dissatisfaction and discontent. Nevertheless, men strive to know. That is a quote from The Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois. So there are a few themes or perspectives on Black education, not say so much for the South, but just Black education in general. One, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois, everyone seems to know his name and his face. He actually is one of our earlier champions for formal academic education in the world of African-American education. He was a free-born Black man in Massachusetts and was well-educated, had received his education as going back as early as, I guess, elementary, high school, and attained several degrees in higher ed. I know he attended Fisk, I believe Harvard, was Columbia one? I can't remember, but just throwing out that he was well educated. He believed that African Americans or Black should study liberal arts and have an academic curriculum, and he sought and desired immediate equality for his people. He believed that the primary focus for African Americans and Blacks should be for education, because education is the root and helps to take you anywhere. What I tell my children now is that once you have an education, no one can take that from you. I don't care if you've received a degree and you were disbarred, you still have an education. If you become a medical doctor and for whatever reason you can no longer practice, you still have something. They cannot take that from you. They can take a piece of paper, but they can't take your education. Du Bois also believed that Blacks should earn their equality. Should not have to earn their equality. I think that was part of the thought, going back to that era after post-Reconstruction, that, you know, you really have to work harder than the next person to attain a status. And that was not something he felt like should be fair. His counterparts, white counterparts, they didn't have to work hard or earn their equality. They automatically received that once they attained a certain level of education. The next perspective on Black education is Booker T. Washington. And very much so, Mark Kinley, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Unlike W.E.B. Du Bois, he was born into slavery in Virginia. We know that from that point in time, especially in Virginia, because it's still the South, he still faced some of the same, he faced the same level of intimidation by whites. He was also forced into not being able to acquire or attain education. And I think that probably shaped him. I know from his youth, post-slavery, he worked in some mines with his father, his stepfather, and his brothers. And that probably really, you know, shook him. Like, I don't want to do this. I really would rather go to school. So he was an attendee at the Hampton Institute in Virginia, and I think he finished school. Yes, you will have access to these slides. He finished his degree at Hampton, did teaching in Alabama for a few years, and then essentially established the Tuskegee Institute, now University in Tuskegee, Alabama. He believed deeply in vocational training for Blacks. He also believed that not just with the vocational training, but someone should also have the academic rigors. And so, but I shouldn't say and so, but he also believed that there was in gradual equality for African Americans. He felt like in teaching the vocational trades that, well, we're not trying to really change the system. We're just trying to make a way for ourselves. And, you know, we know that the education's, the academic rigors is, yes, that's definitely a must, but we need to make money and support ourselves and sustain ourselves. We're not trying to, you know, rewrite laws or take over governments. That's what he advocated for. He usually received support from white counterparts, especially here in Alabama. You know, a dollar is a dollar, you know, and if you've got it, you're a leg up on the next person. But he was never really that popular with liberal Blacks. And at the turn of, you know, not say the century, but yeah, the turn of the century, he and Du Bois were, you know, not on the same page, and very much so where they were friendly, but to a point. There was one more counterpart that I need to talk about. No, not everyone knows, and I have to say this, but we're going to skip to that later. But which leads into our next discussion. Go ahead, you're good, with the history of HBCUs. So I said that Tuskegee Institute, now University, is one of our historically Black colleges and universities. That's what HBCU stands for. The first three are Cheyney University in Pennsylvania. It was the first school established in 1837. So you see, it was way before slavery ended. And it was established by the Quakers for the education of people of African descent. Lincoln University, also in Pennsylvania, was established in 1854. They were established by Mr. John Miller Dickey and Miss Sarah Emmeline Cresson. That was his wife. She was from the Society of Friends in Philadelphia, and he was a pastor or reverend. And I'll get to the common theme here in a second. And then the final top three, for the rounding out the top three who started the Black school experience, was Wilberforce in Ohio, was established in 1856 by the Conference of Methodist Episcopalian Church. Now, all these three have one thing in common. They were all started, go back. Yeah, there you go. They were all started, nope, go back one more. They were all started by white citizens of the United States, all Northerners. And as you can see, Pennsylvania and Ohio, they're by no means South. Wilberforce is in the northwestern corner-ish of Ohio. So when I say, like, yeah, they were historically Black colleges, but that was just so they could educate Black people. Most of the early presidents and principals of these schools were white, as were the board of trustees if they had one. What probably sets Wilberforce apart in this group is that by 1863, they were purchased by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is an offshoot of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and became the first privately Black owned HBCU in history. So we can say that, okay, so while they may have had a start with white counterparts, at some point they say, I think it would be best if we led our people into the next phase of life. Okay, you can skip forward. Now we get into Alabama A&M University. Also, a historically Black college and university. It was established by Alabama legislature in 1873, December 6th, 1873 to be exact. The first day of classes was held May 1st, 1875. The gentleman on the left side of the picture is the Reverend Dr. William Hooper Council, who was our first principal and / president of the institution. He was selected, and he also is actually considered the pioneer for Negro education, industrial education in Alabama, not Booker T. Washington. As much as people like to say Booker T. Washington did this, he did that, he was not the first. Council was not the first, but in the state of Alabama, William Hooper Council is the first. I know there's something I'll share with you all later. It's part of our resources. It talks about Booker T. Washington and how they set up systems of industrial education, or his kind of method for his school, and how that got set up all over the South. It's probably true because people liked what he was saying and felt like they could spread his message. But Council was the first here in Alabama for Black schools. He was born as an enslaved man or a slave child in North Carolina, July 1848. He was sold here in Madison County, Alabama, 10 years later. His family was sold as a part of the Richmond slave pen, and Richmond being Richmond, Virginia slave pen. So they made their route from North Carolina to Virginia and actually was sold here on the property that we call Normal. So the fact that the campus is here is great history. He himself was only formally educated for 3 years by a freedman school in Stevenson, Alabama, or Jackson County, Alabama. So how many of you have heard of Scottsboro, Alabama? I don't think I'll be able to see any hands with my face on the screen. Okay, okay, we got a couple few. Well, essentially Stevenson is not that far from Scottsboro, Alabama, but that's where he attended school, which in driving distance is about an hour from here. So if you imagine, as this man post-slavery is taking classes all the way out in the country somewhere, and not in a place where he was well liked. Freedmen were not really welcomed in the South. Carpetbaggers, scallywags, you probably heard some of those terms. Northerners were not welcome in Alabama. So for him to be receiving an education here in the South, they were definitely met with some resistance. Go forward for me, sir. A&M had 3 different locations. The very first site, which was named the Huntsville State Normal School for Negroes, held classes in downtown Huntsville in rented homes. They had several homes that were rented just for dormitories, and then they had classes in some of the other homes that they rented. The second site, which in the image at the very top is actually a historic marker at the Von Braun Center, also downtown Huntsville, where they actually purchased land for a formal campus. And like I said, the historical marker is standing there at that present site. They've done some construction and made things nice, but that sign has gone back up. The current site of campus is, like I said, 4.5 miles northeast of downtown Huntsville. Again, the site where Council was sold as a slave to Judge D.C. Humphreys. I believe I spelled his last name a little wrong, but hey. And the Green Bottom Inn was a historic landmark here in the northern part of the state. It was really quickly owned by Mr. John Connolly, who was a Revolutionary War veteran who bought land in the valley, the Tennessee Valley, before statehood, about 1815. This home served as, it was actually a hotel. That's why it says inn. And several presidents stayed there. So Polk, Madison, and before Jackson was president, he was General Jackson. He stayed there, raced his horses on the quadrangle, the famous quadrangle. And part of the reason why the forced movement of Native peoples from Alabama happened, because he just loved Alabama so darn much. So more history. Go forward for me, sir. All right. So here we're going to break out just for a little bit. I would like for you, if you can, share anything that you've learned so far with your group. And Dr. Blum, I'll let you control the breakout groups. But if there's anything new that you've learned, if there's any surprises that have come up just in what I've said so far, let us know, talk to your group, and then maybe kind of hold on to that, because I would like to see what you say later on, because kind of coupled with what I said earlier, just what to think about, and then maybe tie that to what you've heard so far. And if there's anything that has reinforced what you already knew. So for those who are familiar with North Alabama, great. But if I've said something new, super. But yeah, so if we can break them out for about, let's say 5 to 7 minutes, is that okay? Okay. So Dr. Blum, would you take care of our groups for us, please?
All right, the room should be open, and you should all be able to get in there.
They're going.
Ivana, could you tell me, do you remember what group you were in originally?
I was in group 1 for the last breakout, but then before that, I think I was in group 4. But I was with
Okay.
Eric recently and Rebecca.
Okay, I'll put you back in that group then. And I think we have some participants who may have similar reactions.
Cool.
All right, so everybody's back. Veronica, did we want to hear anything, or
Sure. Let me see. We have 4 groups, 4 breakout groups. All right. If
yes.
Someone from group 1 can share what you've learned, if anything new so far, any surprises, if you can share with us what you discussed in your group breakouts.
Well, I can share with you all what my group just discussed as it relates to both leaders, Washington and W.E. Du Bois. We all agreed that both of them, they were dedicated individuals who focus on improving the lives of African Americans, but they just had their differences. Of course, Washington, he just believed in African Americans gradually becoming self-sufficient, while on the other hand, Du Bois believed in things like immediate civil rights and immediate social equality. And Washington, he mainly would focus on economic development, while of course Du Bois was mainly focusing on education and intellectual development. He believed that there were just not enough African Americans having doctorate degrees or being in high places. But of course, we also understood that Washington was the one that was more willing to like compromise with the white leaders. While on the other hand, Du Bois, he was sort of like confrontational, like more like Malcolm X, like when we compare Malcolm X and Dr. King. But both of them, they left a legacy, okay? And both of them get the credit for trying their best to improve the lives of African Americans during that time. They just had different ideological perspectives, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for
You're
sharing.
welcome.
How about group three? Group three, anything interesting?
Who was in group three?
Yes, group 3 was Beth, Josie, Leanne, and McKinley.
Yeah, we briefly touched on HBCUs. I touched on the idea that even coming from South Florida, going to a school that was right next to HBCU, I went to Florida State, where FAMU was across the tracks. And I thought that HBCUs were synonymous and deeply rooted in the South. I rarely know about HBCUs in the North, so it was surprising to me to find out that they started and were pioneered in the North. And so it's confronting, a little bit of, you think that but there's more to the story there. We also touched on education in general. You had that piece. Why was education so important during this time period? And again, I think someone mentioned that earlier. Hey, if you don't have education as you are launching off into this migration, you're going to have to get it somewhere. You're going to have to figure out how to obtain tools and resources to compete and also to advance yourself and your family ahead. So we briefly touched on that a little bit. There was a book that was referenced that I want to look into. It's by Horace Tate, and The Lost Education of Horace Tate. Could someone jump in and kind of share a little bit more about that? I was looking that up. But that sounded really interesting, and I wanted to touch on it. But someone from our group who touched on it, if you want to.
Yeah, I had mentioned it. It is by Vanessa Sidwell Walker. It's about like Black education in like the segregated South, specifically in Georgia. And so she kind of profiles and talks about a school principal, I believe, who was like doing this wonderful work of just kind of like creating these really excellent schools for Black students. And so I think that when we're talking about like counter narratives and the history of Black education, like that's an excellent text to sort of get into. So recommend it to everybody. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. And just for the record for everyone, the chat transcripts, I will go ahead and upload this as well. So they'll be a part of our resource page. I know Adele had mentioned it earlier, like, gosh, we're going to lose all the chat, but we actually have it. So I'll upload it even from last week and what we do for today as well. So those will be there.
Group 2 was Andrea, Hope, Kevin, Lauren, and Wilma.
For our group, we talked, I think Andrea shared a little bit. We talked.
Sorry.
Yeah, we talked at the tail end, we tried to get into our students and how our students judge Washington very harshly, and how we have to like what are the ways we can deconstruct that in some ways. And I'm like, I was trying to tell my students, it's the big C, y'all. It's context. Like, please don't forget this. Like, look at his worldview and what's going on. And still they're like, so that's where we kind of were joking about, like, how can we not flip our students, but like, let's give this man some nuance here.
It's perspective. It's all about perspective.
All about perspective. And I think Du Bois is held up often in a lot of ways without deconstructing his elitism, deconstructing talented 10th ideologies. So I'm really excited about kind of digging into that for summer of like, how do we kind of deconstruct some of these narratives with our students? And I'm like, I love that no matter where we teach, I don't even know where you teach, I forgot where you teach, but from California to
I'm in Florida.
The students are always like, nah. So we thought that was really entertaining. Yeah, similar to MLK, Malcolm X. Exactly.
Thank you. And group 4, what do we have? What'd you learn? Anything so far? Who is group?
That's Kate, Viola, Kamaria, Lisa, and Raven.
We were just talking about we just didn't know the order of HBCUs like founding. I always thought it was Wilberforce, so I've been teaching wrong. So I was like, what? Oh, so even it wasn't as, that might have been small to some, but it was big to me because I was just proud to say, hey, from Ohio, Wilberforce, #1, and I was like, Cheney, okay, like where did that come from? So yeah, that just took me back and said, hey, you need, do some more learning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and it's funny because the only HBCU, well, being from Indiana, we have none. Of course, I know about Central State and Wilberforce, and what's the other one out there in Ohio? That's
it.
Only two. Central State, Wilberforce.
Yep.
Okay. Kentucky State, but Alabama A&M has always been #1 because that's the one that's closest to me. I was sharing with Adele and Nathan while you all were in breakout that I had kind of an emotional response earlier, and hopefully I don't have another one. So let me just be very clear. Hopefully I don't have another one right now, but I am personally connected to the campus that I work on. I know I probably didn't say this before, or at least not in as much depth, but my grandparents worked here. My grandfather was an instructor in auto mechanics, and he received his degree, I think, if not from Virginia Union, Virginia State, one of the schools, one of the Black schools in Virginia. He received his degree there and came further south. So his family questioned, why would you go further south? Like, what are you doing? And he was like, I got to get a job. I have to take care of my wife. And at the time he had one child, which is my uncle. By the time he came here, he only had the one child, but by the time 1960 rolled around, he had 2. My mom was the second. And he uprooted the family and came here to Alabama A&M, and this is where he worked. The building behind me, which is the library, I'll link so you guys can see the structure right there. My grandmother ended up working in this building. She served in a variety of capacities on campus, but she ultimately did most of her time here at the library. My mom is a graduate of Alabama A&M University. My uncle went to Prairie View A&M. God bless his soul. Because I mean, he's an outcast at this point in time. But I come from a family of educators, and to talk about Black education, especially in the South, means everything. My connection to what I do every day when I talk to our students is, I think it kind of pours out of it spills out of me. And my thing is, once you get it, and I said it earlier, once you receive your education, no one can take that from you. I don't care what path in life you take. But the one thing that I've learned is that all HBCUs have one common goal, and that is to educate the masses, to make sure that you have at least that one thing. And I wanted to make sure that this presentation came off that exact same way. And I wanted to at least share my emotional response to let you all know that I'm connecting with everything that you're saying. I've read some of the Padlets, and I'm really just like fully invested now. And I feel like this is now more meaningful. It was meaningful before, but like it's now more meaningful. Like I get to share what I have come to know. And like you said, Lisa, you may have only known about Wilberforce being the first. Well, A&M was the first Black school in the state that received its land grant status. We'll talk about that here shortly, but there are a lot of firsts that all of us can claim, or at least say is a claim to fame for that school. Even with FAMU, like, if you went to Mark Kelly, you said Florida State or FAMU?
So I tell everyone, and I have to say this, I went to Florida State University with my family, and they are still there. My family was at FAMU.
Okay.
So I do that, yeah.
So like you said, for your experience, you only knew that the South was where HBCUs resided. I can go on I can't go on, but I can say that, you know, even talking about the establishment of HBCUs, knowing that most of them were not started by Black people, you know, that's another important factor. You didn't have enough educated Blacks. And if you did, they probably were educated in the northern schools, and then they came south and kind of spread the wealth. So it's good at least to know and to explore those things. And I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the rest of the presentation, but I wanted to at least let you all know that I appreciate everything that you shared. And it does have meaning to me, and just let you know that. So I'm going to continue on. This is a quote from Reverend Dr. William Hooper Council. I've slept in a cotton pen a whole winter because I had no better place. I have washed an only shirt and then sat in the shade of a tree while it dried. I wore a pair of Yankee drawers for pants for a whole winter. I wore low-cut shoes in the winter without socks. When a boy, I never had an undershirt nor dreamed of an overcoat. I plowed once 3 days for an old Greenleaf's arithmetic. I only had a split seater for light for 3 years. Later, I walked 3 miles 3 times a week for lessons a week in physics and chemistry, and paid a learned professor 50 cents for each lesson. God forbid that anybody, white or Black, should ever be forced to battle against such odds. So that's what Council's personal, okay, that doesn't look good. Yeah, okay. That was his personal account of what it took for him to go get his education. I wanted to at least connect the two, Council and Washington. This is a letter that we have in our collection at the library. It is a letter from Washington to Council, and it simply reads, my dear sir, I'm very glad that you can read a paper before the State Teachers Association on the subject of the need of educated labor in the South. This, I think, is a good subject, one, I think, that has not been touched upon by any member of the association and will prove beneficial in many respects. I thank you very much for a copy of your excellent little pamphlet. It is timely and will accomplish great good. I hope it will have the wide circulation which it merits. Yours truly, B.T. Washington. Again, I did say earlier that Council and Washington kind of sat on opposite sides of an aisle per se. But in truth, they were really colleagues, and they were fighting essentially for the dollars that were on the table. So what they were fighting for, money from the Morrill Act. So for those of you who are familiar with land grant institutions, there are many in almost every state of the union, almost. But the Morrill Act of 1862 was an act donating public lands to the several states and territories, which might provide colleges for the benefit of agriculture and mechanic arts. So this first act was in 1862. Justin Morrill was who it was named for, and it established public colleges in the states funded by the development, or sale of federal land grants. Going back to what Mark Kinley opened up when he said the forced removal of natives, more than 10 million acres of grants were former native tribal lands. So it's unfortunate that we had Andrew Jackson. We know why he played a role he played, but this lent itself to the establishment of those land grant schools. So your Auburn universities, your Purdue universities, your Florida states, you see the point. Native people were removed, and 30,000 acres of land was granted to each state. They just had to determine who was going to receive those funds. Like I said, Auburn University is a land grant. It was the first land grant here in Alabama, and it was a normal school for men. So a teaching school for men, and of course, then changed its name. The focus of education for these land grant institutions was agriculture, mechanic arts, and extended opportunities to farmers and working people who previously were excluded from higher education. So agriculture, mechanic arts, family and consumer sciences, or home economics as we now know it. And then of course you have your extension programs, and extension programs really sent those county agents out to the farms, out to people's homes to help them do one of two things. One, for the farm agent, the county extension agent was generally a male, and they had a white one and a Black one. So let me be very clear. You had your white agents and your Black agents, and they went out to the community, to those Black families and farmers, and they showed them how to use new farm implements. They talked about new techniques that were supposed to be, or that were seen as the technique to use at the time. And for the female extension agents, they helped women get their kitchen set up. And so you're gonna be like, what do you mean kitchen set up? Yeah, I know where to put my toaster, I know where to put my blender, and I'm gonna put my plates in this cabinet right here. My season's gonna go over the stove. Yeah, but there was a way to do things. And so those women or female extension agents went to the home and helped women set things up. Because as you and I both know, there was not like you could go to the store and buy a bottle of some Lowry seasoned salt. No, you had to make your own seasoning at home. And so you had to, there was a way to do it. And they probably showed them very much the same as the men did in the farm. They did it with the women in the kitchen. They showed them how to probably can or bottle or preserve items. And from this initial group, there were 57 schools that were designated as 1862 institutions. And then we roll into the second Moral Act. And this one was in 1890. And you're going to say, okay, well, that wasn't the first one sufficient? No, the first one was not sufficient. This second one actually covered people who were not, well, let's just say included in the first place. So the second Moral Act was established because people of color were excluded from attending those schools, especially since a lot of them were, well, practicing segregation. This was post-war. But even after, immediately following the Civil War, Blacks didn't have access to that education because of the segregation policies in place. So this act targeted the former Confederate states and aimed to rectify race-based discrimination. So I'm gonna use Purdue University. That is in West Lafayette, Indiana. For those who are familiar with the Midwest and the Boilermakers, they actually had Black students. Indiana University had Black students. Although they had Black students, those students could not stay or eat in the spaces where students normally stayed and ate. So they at least had one up. We gave them, we let them come to our classes. We provided them the accommodations to take to do their studies, but they don't have to give you accommodations to sleep or eat. Some people slept in attics. Some people had to eat in the kitchen. What does that sound like? It required states to establish separate land-grant institutions for Blacks or to demonstrate admission at those 1862 institutions and not restrict them by race. So here's the other example. Tennessee State University is in Nashville, Tennessee. You all have probably read in the news in the past few years or since, all the legislation has changed things, or people talking about the funding of HBCUs not being fair. Tennessee State is, that's pretty much been the predominant thing that I've heard about, is short a lot of money, millions of dollars, as every HBCU is. That is considered a land grant. Well, University of Tennessee, Knoxville has made its case that, well, we provided access for the students to take classes. So in essence, the state of Tennessee is off the hook for kind of owing that money to Tennessee State, because they said, well, we never refused students to use or seek their education here. So I'm using that as an example. So the school had to demonstrate that you made it so students could come take classes. You don't have to show that you gave them a place to stay or food to eat. And money, not land, was administered. As we all know, money doesn't go very far, but if you have land, you own land. That says everything. Now, A&M sits on several hundred acres of land, not just on this campus proper, but even further north in Meridianville. Now, I know, Eric, you said you were from Huntsville, so you've seen you know about the area that we have in Meridianville. It's like a farm, kind of an extension farm, but yeah, it's like a research station. And so A&M was one of the 3 schools who competed for those Second Moral Act funds. We were side by side with Tuskegee and Alabama State. William Hooper Council purchased land in 1890, and this is something that's documented on campus, but he purchased the land that we're currently on and deeded it to the state. And that was in an effort to say, hey, state of Alabama, as much as I know you really want to give this money away and you want these federal funds to help support these schools or sustain them, this is A&M's way of saying we want that money. And so by purchasing over a few hundred acres of land, they were able to secure land grant status in 1891 and become the first one in the state as an HBCU to become a land grant. We extended course offerings to include the vocational and liberal arts, much So like a Tuskegee University, because of A&M's land-grant status, Tuskegee is also afforded land-grant status. So they are land-grant, but only because of special invitation because of an A&M. And then they were soon approved to offer degree programs. So they actually extended their first degree in 1901. That was their first degree that was actually conferred by the state. So next slide, please.
So Veronica,
Yes.
I'm thinking that you spent a lot of time here speaking about your personal connection to this history. And I think that that's of the utmost importance. Looking at the time that we have left, I'm wondering, would it be, I think it's appropriate to then maybe have everybody else start to think about their personal and individual family education.
Okay, that's
So,
probably fine.
So right here we have a prompt for you to sort of contemplate. Think about how the specific and individual stories of your family's education connected to the society-wide trends in education. So their individual stories might reflect or contradict society-wide forces. So Veronica, you mentioned your grandfather's own education and how his personal trajectory contradicted the facts of the Great Migration itself, right? He moved deeper south, further south. So I would invite everybody to take a moment, and we're going to give you 5 minutes to sort of maybe write and reflect, maybe journal in your State Black Archives journal if you've received it, about the story of education within your family. How did your parents or guardians go through their educational trajectory? What were the forces involved in acting upon them? Perhaps what were your own what's your own educational history? And I know that we all have complicated histories with education. And so let's try to unpack that a little bit. And as we're doing with a lot of this work, connect it to these greater society-wide trends, maybe that ones that have come up in Veronica's presentation here. So does anybody have any questions about that? So let's go ahead and take a moment. Go ahead, feel free to turn off your cameras, and let's reflect in response to this prompt.
How's everyone looking? Everyone looking good so far?
Yeah, let's, if we could sort of find a resting point in your thoughts. You might be like just getting started on a long meditation here or long reflection, because I think that education is so integral to people's lives, that there's a lot to unpack here. And so this might be something to continue journaling after we finish this session. Do we want to take I think maybe just take a minute or two if there's anyone who has anything that they'd like to share with us from this? Not mandatory. I know a lot of this might be personal, but is there anyone who would like to share a thought that occurred to them?
I'd like to share a quick thought.
Yes, please.
Part of it is similar to what someone had referenced, and I don't know why my camera just all of a sudden stopped working, but similar to what someone said, I think last week when we met, and I lost my thought there. Oh, I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to say. I sat just in silence thinking about it for a while, like the implications of what I do know. I know that I wrote on my Padlet that my grandma, she quit school when she was in 8th grade, and I knew that that was common. My mom is the youngest of 17 children. I'm part of an old family, so I'm more like, I don't want to say more connected to my roots because I don't know that much of their education. However, I just know about their situation. My mother is a daughter of a sharecropper. She picked cotton as a child. She's from Elmore County in Alabama. We went to go see the big house in quotes when I was a child, and I didn't know what that meant, but it was still had that same structure of slavery. Anyways, there's a long thing I could go into with that, but I'll stop there. However, I know that for my mother and them, education was important, but they didn't have money. They grew up on a farm and they had assets. My family has land, which is worth a lot now. They have their cows and things still and all that, but they didn't have the money for education. So my mother joined the military, joined the army. My dad joined the Air Force, and that's kind of what bore my experience. And I think of it's kind of like that extension of the Great Migration. My dad's mother grew up in Buffalo, New York, but they're originally from Florida. And my mom, she's from Alabama, grew up on the farm down a dirt road, and she joined the military to see the world. So that was her form of like kind of educating herself on the world, though she didn't get a chance to go to college. So yeah, our whole family is in different parts of the globe in the US and all of that, seeking better opportunities that weren't available where they're from. So yeah, that's all I could think of in the education side.
That is powerful to know that, mom had to join the military. I want to see the rest of the world. I've seen enough of back roads, Alabama. That's enough.
She said that. She said, I never wanted to go back to Route 1, Box 16. And I only know her address because she repeats that all the time. Like you said, I'm gonna leave this shovel here. They grew up doing back-breaking work. So that is not something that they were going to do. They were going to go off to school, or they were boots or books. That was the option. Same one my parents gave me. And I'm, for one, happy with the decisions that were made by them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else have anything you want to share?
I'll share. I really connected with you on your family's journey through education. And I think it's interesting coming from my background on my father's side, definitely, I would say highly educated. Black people attended HBCUs. My grandfather and his brother integrated a medical school in Texas, which inspired my journey in education. On my mother's side, though, I pondered their move to Michigan during the Great Migration, and they were not allowed to seek any type of higher education because there were no schools that provided that at the collegiate level for them. And so, as you said, you got emotional. I got a little emotional too. My middle name is my grandmother's name. And so when I graduated college, she was just like, I'm so excited to see my name on a college, degree. And I think that although we're often like taught history or we're reading these, you know, journeys, that these are actual like living stories. That's what I appreciate so much about history, and they do have emotional connections. And when we read or learn about, you know, these land grant acts and policies and laws, that they do impact real people, and even today, continuing today, of like, I don't want to get too political, but you know, the fact that public education is just under attack in various states, right? So that this past is very much present in all of us is really important. So thank you for allowing that time and space to share and connect.
Absolutely. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, I'm part of the reverse migration, the movement back south, and knowing that my sons, though we were all born in Indiana, they get to share in this experience with me. Both of their grandparents on his dad's side, one was from Mississippi, the other's from Alabama, and they went north, one to Chicago, one to Indy, and then met in Indy. So we can share in the experiences, but not knowing exactly how far that road really is, kind of using Rebecca's example, looking how far that road really is between the start and the end point. You know, we have too many other avenues to travel down, and we're going to do this together. So I'm really privileged to be here with you all.
I just wanted to say, I'm gathering and collecting stories from my parents. I feel very blessed to be able to do that as they're pushing 80. But just trying to gather stories about their parents, my grandparents. One thing that led me into the institution that had me calling, it was calling my name, was Huntsville. I haven't been to Huntsville in 20 years. And I used to go there every summer to visit with my grandparents, who now are laid to rest there. So I'm just overwhelmed with joy and emotion to go and pay my homage to them. But we also have roots at Oakwood University. And I noticed that one didn't come up as a HBCU for, I know we're talking about AAMU and that's where we are. So I understand that, but I wanted to know, I don't know if we will be traveling there, but I will be traveling there prior to the Institute. And so it's just bringing my family together just to get to know more of our histories. And I know this is on my maternal side of the family, and they came from a large family as well. Mm-hmm. And I know my grandmother on my paternal side she only went to a 3rd grade education. My dad always reminds us of that. And to know that she was able to do so much with spreading the gospel around to different states, especially within, more so within the state of New York, where she would travel and preach the gospel, is something that we are always reminded. So I'm just looking forward to connecting with my family more, to understand and learn more of the different educations and that we have, and more about my grandparents.
Well, welcome home. We'll welcome you home the right way.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're
trying
right.
to make me cry.
I'm not trying to make anyone else cry. I've already done enough of that today. And if you cry with me, that's okay. I'll take it.
So one of the things that I'm sure we all experience, you know, when we teach our kids, is time periods, like having students understand the perspective of time, where you hear history or you teach history or they learn history and they think it's all just, you know, hundreds of years ago, and like, you know, people are long dead, and this is part of the whole idea of like making it relevant. And so we obviously know how recent all of these things are. But, you know, passing that on to students is kind of hit and miss sometimes. However, I say all of that to say that this particular discussion always hits my students clearly, vividly, because one of the things that when I teach about, you know, Brown versus Board, and, you know, the process of integrating schools and so on and so forth, my father was part of the first integrated class at a local high school in Broward County, MacArthur High School. He was the first integrated class. This is 1969. So when I tell them this, it actually serves a number of different functions. The first function it serves is, again, what we already know, but students kind of, you have to bring them to it. This idea of just because a law is passed, does not mean people are following that law.
Right.
And what makes it even crazier is Broward County, which is South Florida, it's literally 20 minutes from Miami, is the, quote unquote, multi-racial, multicultural part of Florida. So we're not talking about, some area of Florida where it's majority white and it's always been majority, whatever. There's an old saying in Florida, the further north you go, the further south you go. And so basically, the Florida is as southern as it gets, especially in the north. Broward County, however, is majority minority, same with Miami-Dade. And so for students to hear that, first of all, Broward County was segregated just like all of Florida. Secondly, not only was Broward County segregated, but it was segregated even after the law required integration, and it was still segregated. And not only that, but it was still segregated for 15 years after. We're talking 1969, we're pulling up on the 1970s. And the last part of this, of course, is all of this is so recent that you are literally being taught by a person whose father was the first to integrate. And so when you put all of that together, that's one of the few times that students, you see the eyes and you see the wheels turning, and it's like, wait a minute. Oh my God. And you know what I mean? And so that's why I love this discussion that we're having, because I know every year when we have this discussion in my classes, the students really it hits them. It really, really hits them. They're literally seeing it in front of their faces.
Right.
So, that's just, my family's, educational backstory. And it's interesting because one of the things that's happening right now in Broward County, one of the things that we were involved in, the very first all Black high school in Broward County, a high school named Dillard High School. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. So they were 1924 was when the doors opened, and so this is their 100th anniversary. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're doing oral histories to collect all the stories from the last 100 years of Dillard graduates, but then we're going to start to expand it as more and more Black schools experience their 100th anniversary, because it kind of it's 1924, and then it's like the next 10 years you start to see more and more schools open. So in the next 10 years now, you're going to see 100th anniversaries happen back to back to back. And so we're starting to collect the oral histories of it. And I'm getting the stories from my parents so they can be a part of this oral history as well. And so I find this discussion just very fascinating, because like I said, it really brings the point home that we know and that we're constantly, trying to get our students to discover, which is A, the relevance of it, B, the recentness of it.
Yeah, you've hit one of the things that I was going to talk about if we'd have more time was my own connection. So you and I shared kind of that. My mom was not maybe the first of her, crew to integrate, but council training for Eric. I know you know about Huntsville, and Kamaria, you said you were familiar. You've been here. Council Training High School was literally the school that sat just a few steps away from where I work, in the building I work in. And it was the county school here one of the county schools here in North Huntsville or Madison County. And its primary population was African Americans. My mom, I was talking to her yesterday in preparation for today, just to kind of get my mind right. But she finished her 6th grade year at council training. Now, my mom will be 69 this year. So give me some frame of reference. Go back, let's see, 6th grade, you would be about 12 or 13 years old, right? So if we go back just within that time frame, we're doing the same thing right here, Kevin. You and I are right there. So my mom was one of those kids who integrated, or was one of those groups of kids that integrated one of the Huntsville city schools, and that was in the 60s.
And it's
Late
interesting you said your mom is 69, my dad's 72. And
See?
so it's that literally that time, yeah.
So it's the same time frame, even though 1954 Brown v. Board of Education said, all right, all schools should desegregate with all deliberate speed, which meant nothing. It just meant take your sweet time. And, you know, if we fast forward into talking about the other stories in Huntsville and why integration was actually happened quicker than probably did for the rest of the state in Huntsville, you know, again, we'll talk about that another time, but it's still important that Alabama, even though, still took its sweet time. So most of the southern states were just like that. I mean, heck, Alabama just got rid of the interracial marriage law back in 2012, 13, 14. They just struck it from the books. So for that to just be a thing that happened and Mississippi beat us to it, like, I'm sorry to say for all the Mississippi folk, like, that doesn't make us look good. But so that's where we are. That is the state of, that is where we live. This is where we are. We're in the South. No surprises,
So
right?
I think this is what it was very clearly apparent is we need to continue this conversation.
Absolutely.
Like this is like absolutely needs to be continued. We need to talk about the fact that Huntsville's still under a desegregation order, right? Yeah, 50 other school districts in the state of Alabama. So let's talk about that. Next week, let's we'll put it on the agenda. I think we can make space for it. And we've got some really wonderful things that we didn't get to today that we do need to get to. So I'd just like to thank all of you for being so open, honest, and like making these connections, you know, for going there. Thank you so much for going there. This is the type of community that we're building in a remote Zoom context. I can't imagine what it's going to be like once we see each other in person. So thank you all for that. Just a quick reminder, we've got, please continue reading The Warmth of Other Suns. Ideally, you'll finish part 2 by our next session. That's part 2 is titled Beginnings. Continue to respond to the invitations to create, continue to document your thoughts, keep track of your footprints of thoughts. And then we will be sharing again, we already have shared it, but we'll share it again, the library resources where we will post the video recordings, all of our documents, the PowerPoints, that'll be all up there. So thank you for just being such a fantastic group. Veronica, you have anything? Yeah.
Yes. So for those of you, I know we're still rolling out and trying to get some actual timeline for stipend release. So that should be coming. I'm hopeful that within the next couple of weeks, we can actually have money sent. So I will send out an email as soon as we can get confirmation of date. If you have not received your book, please just send me an email. I was hopeful that everyone would have it for the most part by today, but bye, Rebecca. But if you have not received your book, at least by today, I mean, by Monday, please let me know. And then we can hopefully track it with our shipping partner on campus. Please make sure you reserve your hotels. They will be closing down the one here in Huntsville by the 21st of June. If anything, at most, all they'll charge is the night before you actually check in, just your incidentals for that one day, and they won't charge until you're there. So if that's a concern for anyone, please let me know, and I can definitely work to see if we can, you know, push it out or do something else. But I want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are trying to work with you as best we can. And as far as your flights, if you have not completed that last form that I sent, just asking for your date of birth and your legal name and your preferred gender, just send it to me. If you can get that done, that would be great. I think there's only a few people that didn't fill it out, but that's important for your flights for TSA. So if you haven't sent it, send it. Book your hotels. If there's any questions, we're here to answer them for you.
Can you tell me what airlines we are flying into?
So that's what I'm trying to coordinate now. So we have one or two options. Right now, we were looking at American, that they don't have any flights, like talking about it. Delta is the other one, and I'm trying to work it out to see if we can fly at least everyone, most of you all to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta, Southwest Airlines to New York. So
is it LaGuardia or John F. Kennedy?
LaGuardia.
Okay.
LaGuardia. Yeah, so, but I'm trying to work it out so you'll know exactly where you're going to and what way we're coordinating it, how we're coordinating it out. So you all will have that information as soon as I get it locked down, but I do need your information so we can secure that this week.
Yes, ma'am. Okay,
Awesome.
thank
You're welcome. All right, so Nathan, Adele.
Yep. We'll see you all next week. Again, same Zoom link. I'll send out a reminder anyways towards the end of next week. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.